Hey everyone, I'm making a quick tutorial video on how to use our Unity template with OVR already set up and with a couple extra niceties already set up for you so that you don't have to repeat some steps. And a handful of packages already installed so that you don't have to worry about it. Some of those packages include the Oculus package because this will be an Oculus Quest app. We also have the Unity XR Toolkit and VRTK. I prefer to use the Unity XR Toolkit for most of the interactions, and I'm going to show you all how to set that up working with the OVR camera rig. So to get this started, we want to come to our controller anchor, which is already nicely set up in the prefab. When you come in here, the whole template will look like this, and it will have a README, and there's some extra information in here and some resources that Cody has put in, and some of the things that I will show off today will also be added to this, so it will look a little bit different from now. But to get that interaction started, we start with the controller anchor, and I'm going to do everything on the left hand just for simplicity's sake. And we want to add the XR controller. And we want to make sure that that is set to the left hand, and that's it. That's all we have to do. The different usages are set up already. There's select, so that would be what you press to grab, and then the activate is what you press. If you were holding a gun, it would be the trigger, which is why it's set to trigger. After that, we also want to set up I think it's the direct interactable, there we go. And that sets up all of the event logic for picking things up, selecting and using, and all of that. Now that that's all nicely set up, that's easy peasy. We also need to add a collider. And I'm going to make a simple box collider. And it will be much too large for our controllers that are seated nicely in the ground. I'm going to make this a bit smaller so that it is about the size of the controller. Now that that exists, we want to make sure it is set as a trigger, and that allows the interactor to see collisions with whatever object we want to add. So next I'm just going to add a 3D object cube. Scale it down so that we can pick it up. I'm going to put this over here on the table. And then I'm going to add an XR grab interactable stuff to it. And this created a couple things for us. The first thing it created was the rigid body. And then it set up the interaction settings for it. And this kind of already comes built in with all the physics handling, which is why it created the rigid body. So there are a couple ways to handle it. We can make it kinematic, or we can make it velocity tracked. For simplicity's sake right now it would be kinematic. Velocity tracked allows you to continue to wave the object around and it respond to physics nicely. But set to kinematic, it removes a lot of the jank from how everything works. One more thing is we need to map the collider. So all we have to do is drag this collider into here, and now the colliders will collide with each other nicely, and we should be able to pick things up. And now if I pick the object up, it will snap to my hand, and it already handles all velocity tracking for me to be able to throw the object. So if I let go of it when I'm throwing it, it adds a little extra force to it. The other thing I wanted to talk about is hand tracking is something we want to attempt to implement in most of our stuff, and you don't have to do this when developing your specific setup. Down the line, we're going to create a pipeline that allows the OVR input system to be directly accessible through hand tracking. So if I hit play right now, and the Quest does some really wonderful things to just automatically detect, I have no mesh for this hand right now, to automatically detect when you're using your hands versus your controller. So this already exists and works really nicely, but already by default, and then if I pick the controllers back up, it switches. And then I put them down, it takes a moment, and then it will disappear and pick my hands back up. Easy peasy. Now, one of the things that George has made and included in this package is the ability to have a gesture recognition system. So I'm going to come in here and make sure that, and the skeleton mesh renderer was on. So we'll swap those. Hit play. Should be able to just hold my hand in front of my face and know that it works. Yep, there it is. Easy peasy. So the gesture recognition that George has included, I will set up similarly to where we set things up for the grab interaction on the left controller. You want to make sure not to set them up on the controller prefab and the hand prefab. All these do is handle the models. So when it comes to setting up the gestures, the first thing we will do is come into our scripts folder, hand tracking folder, and there are two scripts in here that we want to use. We've got the gesture recognizer and the custom hands. So I'm going to slap these right here on the left hand anchor. And setup for this is fairly straightforward. So we want to take that hand prefab and throw it into our custom hands OVR hand section. And then what we need to do is set up and create some objects that will be tracked to the hand's fingertip positions. There's also a palm object, but we won't be using that in the gesture recognition. Now I've already created a handful of spheres, and they're nicely nested in the ground and already doing their own thing. And these are literally just spheres that I've scaled down to the 0.2. And all I need to do is make sure that these game objects are all mapped into their relative positions here. So we'll take the index, throw in the index, middle to middle, ring to ring, pinky to pinky, thumb to thumb, palm to palm. Easy peasy. Now that that is set up, there are some extra steps in here for debugging and allowing you to get some extra messages out of the code. Now what I've done in my specific version of the package is I've disabled the debugging, and all you need to do so is to the custom hand script right here. And we come down, I believe it is line 131. There is a Text Mesh Pro asset that it's looking for, and if it doesn't see it, it will throw a fit and throw some errors. And that's okay, they don't hurt anything, it just hurts your console. Throws a bunch of errors for no reason. So I disabled that because I don't need to see the debug right now. And now that everything is set up here, we need to add the hand object to the gesture recognizer script. We'll take that hand prefab, set it right here. And then in the fingers, we will set 5 or 6, depending on if we want to use the palm or not. For simplicity's sake, I just will. And then all we have to do is re-add, just like before, all of these objects. Apologies for how slow this is. I have to turn my entire head because I'm using a virtual desktop so that I can quickly demo things without having to pull my headset off. There we go. All of that is set up and it's working nice and dandy. Now the process for recording gestures is really easy and simple. First things first, we get into the game with our hand in front of us doing hand tracking fun stuff. And we make the gesture. Notice how we now have a bunch of spheres tracked to our fingertips. Now you can just turn off the mesh renderer for this once you have everything set up so you don't have to see them. But I'm going to do a little thumbs up and I'm going to hit pause. I know I'm looking through my my little nose gap in my Quest so that I can see what's going on. Hit pause while making the gesture and it will freeze it. And then we come into the gesture recognizer script. We want to set a name. Hit save current gesture. And now we'll add that up here to the saved gestures. So now we have thumbs up. And then I'm going to unpause briefly and have my hand in here again. I'm going to do one of these just for fun. Come up and hit pause. There's the gesture recorded. Call it OK. Save current. And we'll do one more. So we did a thumbs up, we did an OK. Let's do a peace sign. Make it real easy. One more time. Save the gesture, and then we've got 3 gestures up here all saved. Now because we recorded them all and paused, they will instantly disappear as soon as we hit unpause and stop the simulation. So all we have to do is copy the component. Then we can very happily end everything, come back in here, and paste the component values. And all that does is you have all of the positions of all of the objects. And the reason I didn't want to, the palm is kind of redundant is because it's always 0. No matter what. But this might have some underlying implications that might affect how things are tracked. Okay, so now that we have all of that running and working nicely, We can come back in, and under this gesture name detected, there's our OK. It just changed to peace, and thumbs up. And come back to peace, or go to OK, or back to thumbs up, and they all work. They all work beautifully. And in every single one of these, I'm going to go ahead and unpause it, is a on-recognized Unity event system. And this is where we're later down the line going to implement it so it literally just will output a OVR input grab. So that this input matches this input for grab. And we have another one for another gesture that will activate the trigger. And that allows it so that basically if you don't want to mess with the hand tracking stuff, you don't have to. You can just design your app for the Jam, no problem. And we will, when importing it to the final application, set everything up nicely so that the hand tracking just works. That way, if anybody is deciding that they don't want to use the controllers and they want to use the hand tracking stuff, they can. And that makes it so that the developers don't really have to do anything, and we make it really easy. There's a little bit more I wanted to show y'all in the way of documentation. So really quick, we have, this is the hand tracking gesture recorder made by George. He's got a GitHub repo for it. And all of the instructions that I kind of just went over are here. That's nice. And one of the other things that I wanted to point out was the XR interaction toolkit that we set up has a handful of nifty documentation and a whole bunch of extra stuff. If you don't want to use the OVR camera rig, we kind of have, basically you just can't use hand tracking. That's the only downside, is it gets a little interesting in trying to get the hand tracking working with their rig. But because I was able to prove that the interaction stuff does work on the OVR rig, it shouldn't be too crazy. And there are some extra interactable stuff and different types. There's a pointer interaction and all kinds of wonderful things. And there's some extra helpers and things like that, and for teleportation and locomotion. So that's nifty, and give this a read when you get a moment, because the Unity XR toolkit is fantastic. Along that, because we're using VRTK4, and there is a very thick lack of documentation, I wanted to go ahead and show you guys where I have been able to find some of the stuff for documentation as they make it. Because they have their VRTK Academy, and it sometimes doesn't get updated. So if you're looking through the Extended Reality GitHub repo, you can come down here, and everything with Tilia in front of it is kind of that's their prefab package. They don't call it that here, they just call it VRTK prefabs. But further down, everything's got, Tilia in front of it, and this is just the prefabs. And not all of them have documentation on it, but some of them do. So for example, this object follower here, if we click in and go to the documentation, we can open the how-to guide, adding an object follower, and the README in here is just very casually in the very nice format that they do have for their stuff for the Academy. There's everything that you need to understand for how to use object tracking with VRTK. I don't recommend VRTK, but if you're much more savvy than I am and think you can figure it out, I encourage you to give it a try. The only reason I don't like to do it is because it doesn't have documentation on everything, and in order to understand what everything's doing, you have to follow a line of just a long train of Unity event system stuff back, because they have all of these things just like this, that you populate an element and you populate an event and all of that stuff, and it gets very confusing very quickly, and the lack of documentation makes everything very hard to do. All right, so I hope that helps y'all get started. One of the other things I wanted to point out was that we found a font or typeface that is really good and used for helping students with dyslexia, and it's got a lot of fun qualities to it that allow it to be much more easily readable. And CB went ahead and made 3D models of the entire alphabet based on that font, as well as including it in the package. So I encourage y'all to work with this as well when it comes to actually creating interactable objects that happen to be letters. In fact, if I wanted to, let's take an uppercase A, put it under our cube. Let's get an LED group. There we go. And now all of a sudden we have and interactable letter A. I'll make this a tad bigger. And now you can come in and start throwing letters at people. Because that's the point, is we want... That's strange. That wasn't fun. I don't know why it's rendering the hand model. I think it's because when it tried to switch, it did some fun things. We'll get the kinks worked out, but you can kind of see that I'm holding the letter A. And I can give it a toss. It's got the collider for the cube. That's why it landed funny. But there, I hope this all helps. I hope this sets things up for you nicely and allows you to get creating without having to do all the redundant tasks. One of the other things that I want to point out that I did have to set up before being able to use the XR kit, and I probably should have mentioned this first, is you have to come in here to this XR plugin management in the project settings and install the Oculus XR plugin. Now, I had a lot of really fun problems with getting this working. When I hit the install button, it did its thing, and then it spit out a really ugly error, and I had to come into the directory for the project and come all the way in here. Here's where I just have my own organization stuff for it, but you'll have to come into libraries, package cache, and find, I think it was the Unity XR Oculus thing, and straight up just delete it. Now, when I did that the first time, it broke. Instead, what I did this time around was I was able to just save my project and everything in it, and exit Unity, and then relaunch Unity. And sometimes when you relaunch it and it's still not working and throwing a fit, kill it, relaunch it again. Then it'll finally tell you that it's installed, and you can come in here and hit the plus button and add the Oculus loader. And that just allows the OVR SDK and its camera rig to talk nicely with the Unity XR toolkit. It allows all the inputs to work nicely. All right, I think that wraps it up. Let's teach Jeb to read. This will be fun.